Hey folks, welcome back to the show. We have a great episode for you today. We're going a little bit of a change of pace. We're moving into exploration of the subconscious and unconscious mind and its impact on your health and longevity and all of those amazing things. My guest is Thais Gibson, who is a wonderful human being. Honestly, her work is phenomenal. And I just had such an incredible conversation with her. I think you guys are really going to enjoy it. But before we dive into the episode, I want to thank you for being here as always. I'd love to encourage you to connect with me in other places. You can also find me on Instagram, just under my name, at Natalie Nidham. And also, if you sign up for the newsletter these days, if you've been listening to the podcast lately, you know we have a 7-part series on health foundations that you will receive as emails once you sign up, which is a lot of the foundation work that I will do with clients before we get into the more advanced biohacking stuff. So hopefully you find that useful. I've gotten some really great feedback on that series. Okay. And of course, if you get value from this episode, please make sure that you share it with your friends, families, and network. And if you're feeling inspired today, make sure to leave us a review on whatever platform you're listening to the podcast on. Okay. Let's talk about this episode a little bit. You know, have you ever really thought about how you might be held back by subconscious beliefs you didn't even know you were holding? 95 to 97% of our beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and decisions come from our subconscious mind. And many of these are rooted in childhood experiences. In this episode of the Longevity Podcast, I chat with Thais Gibson about how our subconscious mind impacts everything from our relationships right around to our physical health. In the conversation, we dive into the difference between the subconscious and unconscious mind and how they influence our beliefs, our thoughts, our emotions, and even our decisions. We also discuss the concept of neuroplasticity and how we can rewire our subconscious programming to create positive change in our lives in just 21 days. Thais shares specific techniques in the podcast that speak to the subconscious through emotion and imagery. She's a best-selling author, counselor, and personal development leader. She founded the Personal Development School to provide a more accessible, authentic way that people have been using to transform their lives. Utilizing the Gibson integrated attachment theory, she empowers individuals to overcome their attachment styles and reprogram any limiting thoughts and behaviors, creating long-lasting and enlightening change. Now, because you're a listener of this podcast, and if you love what Thais is saying here, you can get 25% off of any of her programs at Personal Development School with personaldevelopmentschool.com with code Natalie 25 off. And don't forget that there's an H in Natalie. So it's NATHALIE 25 off, the number 25 off. And now let's jump into the episode. Hey folks, just a quick reminder that all of the information presented in this podcast is for information purposes only. No medical advice, no diagnosing, no treatments suggested here. Before you try anything that you hear about or learn about here, make sure that you check with your medical provider. Welcome to the show, Thais Gibson. It is a pleasure to have you here today.
I'm so grateful to be here with you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, this is going to be a great conversation. You know, this is one of those, one of the reasons why I changed the name and the branding of the podcast was because I felt that the container that I used to be in was too small. And what I love about this new, bigger container that I'm in is being able to get my arms around other conversations like this one that I think are so crucial to our happiness today, but even in every way for longevity and living a long and fruitful life. So I'm so happy that we found each other, and I'm really excited about this conversation. So to get started, Thais, why don't you tell us a little bit about you and the work that you do, and how you came to do this work, because this is it's a beautiful space that you're in, this space of helping people to understand really like the underpinning drivers driving their behavior and their needs in many ways, and helping them to understand how to work through them and deal with them and maybe release what might not be serving.
Definitely. So I definitely got into this line of work, as most people do, probably because it was something that I was really challenged with. So I grew up in a household that was very chaotic, saw a really intense divorce. It lasted for 20 years, went to the Superior Court of Canada. And
Oh my God.
I was the oldest of two kids. And I was just kind of the sounding board, I think. I think neither of my parents really knew who to talk to about some of what they were facing. So it was very much parentified, put in the middle, made emotionally responsible in various ways for a lot of what they were experiencing. And of course, the drawback is that that's a hard thing for a child. But honestly, the big silver lining for me, or benefit, is that I got really curious at a very young age about people and about the mind and about relationships and why people do the things that they do and how to solve for them and how to make things better. And so, as conditioning would have it, a lot of my upbringing, because of so much chaos, is I became the fearful avoidant or disorganized attachment style, which is sort of seen as being the most challenging attachment style to have. And I had a lot of tumultuous relationships. I was very hot and cold. And I always found if I was on my own, I was great. But as soon as I was in relationships, it was my life would become more chaotic because I didn't know how to have a healthy relationship or what that looked like. And so much of my own conditioning was love equals fighting and arguing and chaos and all the things. And so I would initiate those things myself. And it felt like a long time. I was quite young, but at around 20 years old, I was like, there's got to be another way. Relationships are very difficult for me. I don't want to keep going through a roller coaster of life here. And I happened to be in a class. And as I was going through unpacking my own inner sort of struggles, somebody said to me, your conscious mind cannot outwill your subconscious mind. And I was like, wow, that explains a lot. That explained a lot of bad habits I was trying to break. That explained many times that I was like, I want to have healthy relationships. And obviously my subconscious had ulterior motives and other programs and set of conditioned patterns that it was trying to sort of revert me back to over and over again. And I also went on to learn that your conscious mind is responsible for roughly 3 to 5% of all of our beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and decisions on a daily basis. And your subconscious and unconscious collectively, because there are slight differences between them, even though people often use them interchangeably, are responsible for 95 to 97% of all your beliefs, thoughts, emotions, and decisions. So I went on a bit of a conquest to learn, well, what's really going on at the subconscious level? How do we rewire it? How do we recondition what's not serving? And how does that really affect so many different systems and areas of our lives? And so I got honestly obsessed with learning about this stuff, just fell in love, and spent a lot of time sort of repatterning myself first. And I saw such success in so many ways personally of things that I never thought I would overcome or change or heal, that I was able to heal in a relatively short period of time, that I was just I need to tell people. And this is almost 14 years ago. And, nobody was talking about this stuff in a mainstream way back then. And so what I ended up doing is I was I'm just going to give workshops for free. So I hadn't even finished school yet. And I started going in and just actually paying out of pocket, renting library spaces for $30 an hour, and just bringing people in who wanted to hear about this. And here's how you can rewire your subconscious. Here's the programs that we have. Here's how they affect us. And actually, after the first time I did that, I had a whole bunch of people be like, oh, are you taking clients? And I was like, well, not really. I'm still in school, but people kind of persisted. And eventually I would have a couple hundred people showing up to these workshops. And I had a 2-year wait list for clients before I even finished school. So I operated in a coaching basis, and really did that for the next 10 years. And had a lot of people be like, 2-year wait lists are not acceptable, and get frustrated with me, which is reasonable. And ended up going, okay, how do I scale this? Because I was really trading a lot of time, working long hours. Felt like, oh my gosh, I have to show up because all these people are waiting on this wait list. And had a friend come, and he was like, put all your stuff online, put it into online programs. And so that sort of took the turn, and eventually retired my practice. And that's what I do now full time.
Wow. Okay. Well, then let's create with let's start with some definitions just to help people get oriented in the space. You mentioned the subconscious and the unconscious mind. You've mentioned things like attachment theory, or not theory,
Styles.
Attachment patterns. Yeah. You've mentioned a bunch of different terms that are common speak in your world and maybe not as familiar in other people's world, and particularly the distinction between the subconscious and the unconscious mind. So basically help us to understand a little bit those two entities, what feeds them and informs them. And I'm going to guess that it's a lot of early childhood experiences is what really programs that hard drive.
Exactly.
That really drives the system, right? So
yeah. So basically we have our conscious mind. Our conscious mind is what we'll think of as our sense of self and identity. It's our logical, rational mind. We have the ability to critically analyze information and think things through. But our subconscious and unconscious are really the ones running the show, and they are our programmed self. Now, the main differentiator between the subconscious and unconscious that's relevant to the conversation is that our subconscious mind we can retrieve information from. Our unconscious mind, it's very difficult to do so. So I'll often refer to the subconscious because we can think back and reflect and introspect and say, oh yeah, at 8 years old, I did feel not good enough when this certain event happened. And I can see how that affected me in various ways. And so we can think of our subconscious mind as really being, rather than our sense of self-identity, it's our habitual self. And our subconscious and unconscious really store all information, technically ever. We consolidate memories over time. We can even misremember things. But a lot of times our subconscious mind stores information by emotion. And by association. And so we'll often be able to actually pull up interesting things from our subconscious by recognizing, oh, I'm feeling, this fear right now of abandonment or betrayal. When have I felt that before? Oh, wow. And all these memories can sort of be retrieved from your subconscious mind. And so, to your point, we absolutely get the vast majority of our conditioning at a young age. Technically between the ages of 0 to 8 years old are the most impactful. It's really in two parts. It's really 0 to 3. We actually are most impacted, and then 3 to 8. And it's actually because we are producing mostly alpha and theta brainwaves, which make us extremely suggestible. So we are hyper sponging up information in our environment, and we're essentially developing our own sense of first layers of that foundational identity of who we are, of what relationships are, of what our body is, about connection. That's where we're really developing that internalized sense of self. And from that space, if we obviously adopt maladaptive programs, we're going to see those maladaptive programs show up in our adult lives. And if we ever have experiences as adults, we're like, why do we do this? I know better. And this can range from you are in a position where you think you're sabotaging something and you're like, why am I sabotaging something? Well, we never actually sabotage. Our conscious mind doesn't say we're going to sabotage ourselves today. What we experience is sabotage as procrastination. What those things are our conscious mind intending one thing, that little 3 to 5%, and our subconscious and unconscious having different programming, different priorities, different needs, different fears that may be blocking us or standing in our way. And so when we can start decoding what's there, what our big limiting beliefs are, what our big fears are, what patterns we've adopted that are probably quite maladaptive in our lives from early childhood or future experiences, we can actually rewire those things. And we'll see that we break free from all of those places we had a glass ceiling in our lives prior, because usually our glass ceilings are self-inflicted. A lot of the times it's because we think we're not good enough or we'll fail, or so, we resist or procrastinate or sabotage because of those previously acquired programs. So the very last thing I'll just say is that we'll also tend to see that because we have neuroplasticity, yes, those first 8 years are the most impactful. And yes, our childhood really forms that foundation. But anything that we're exposed to through repetition that elicits an emotional response over time is actually firing and wiring those new neural networks. So we can have this repetition and emotion over time. And if we have a stable childhood until 8 years old, and then it becomes chaotic at 15, that can recondition our subconscious in a negative way. But by the same token, we can leverage the understanding of how rewiring and neuroplasticity work. And I'm happy to share some tools about that later. And we can recondition the programs we find that are not serving us.
Interesting. Well, so the whole neuroplasticity of the mind, that's a relatively new thing. Not new, but relatively new. Because I think that, in the past, people would say, once you're past your first 5 years of life, you're stuck with whatever you've got, and this is what you're going to have to work with. And I feel like over the last couple of decades, let's say the last 20, and you'd have a better sense of that timeline than I do, But this whole realization that the brain is neuroplastic, that we can create new neural pathways that hold neurons that wire together or fire together, wire together, like repeating behaviors to repattern different ways of being and reacting and responding. Like I find that quite fascinating that for so long, the belief was, nope, that's just the way it is. You can't teach an old dog new tricks. Nope, 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 nope. And you see it sometimes in older generations of people who will say, that's the way I am. I'm not going to change. I'm too old. And you kind of want to shake them and go, actually, that's a story. That's not true.
Exactly.
You may not want to change.
100%.
Yeah. So something just came up for me while you were talking, and the whole, because I'm in this space of, healthy aging and longevity and one of the things that comes up very often is this whole idea of adverse early childhood events, that can really set the stage for everything from, whether it's dysfunctional behavior, but even to physical illness. Like that people's longevity can be massively impacted by their very early years. And I find that what I find interesting, and I'm curious about your insight on this, is you will meet people who show both sides of that coin. We will sometimes come across people who had the most horrific early childhood events, and yet somehow as adults have risen above it and are like these incredibly amazing, enlightened beings. And then other people who have really suffered the consequences of these early childhood events. And in some cases, like they're just as horrific, right? Like even like looking at Holocaust survivors, right? If stress kills, there should be no 90-year-old Holocaust survivors, right? And yet there's a lot of them. Yeah. And or any other, I'm just using Holocaust because that's something in my space, but I mean, there's any number of other massively traumatic cultural events that have affected populations of people. And we see both sides of the coin here, but we have this rhetoric that stress will make you sick and stress will kill you. And yet we see people who defy that over and over again. So just curious about your perspective on that.
It's a fantastic question. And I think it's really boiling down to what we're talking about. It's neuroplasticity. And there's an amazing body of research about something called post-traumatic growth. And it talks about basically how people who go through profound stress actually end up on the other side of that, being less stressed as individuals for very specific reasons. So you'll see a few things, because you referred to like the ACEs, like the adverse childhood events. And there's obviously this huge correlation that you mentioned between that and physiological illness as an adult. And something that's really interesting is if you just look at a couple things that happen after trauma, and then we'll link that back to post-traumatic growth. But when you look at the impact of trauma, so let's say we have a traumatic event, and let's say we call it, we can have big T trauma, or we can have little T trauma that's repeated enough that it actually has the same type of impact on the brain as one or two events of large T trauma. So let's just say like a pretty large T trauma. Let's say as a child, somebody goes through, God forbid, but some sort of like physical abuse in the home. And we have this big T trauma event. When we go through that kind of experience, what happens is our subconscious mind, when we can't understand something, it stores it with meaning attached. We really work to give things meaning, especially as young adults when we're trying to figure out our environment, or young children when we're just trying to learn like who we are and how things work. And so let's say we make it mean, I am unsafe. Okay. Now we have different core meanings. There tend to be about 18 major ones that we'll give, but maybe we make it mean a combination. Maybe we make it mean I am unsafe and I am unlovable, or this wouldn't be happening. Now we have a subconscious program. And unfortunately, because the subconscious mind is the habitual self, the way we get imprinted by trauma, we will come to form as a part of our self-identity. So now, because somebody was physically harmful in childhood towards us, we are now somebody that sees ourselves as an adult as a person who is unlovable and always unsafe. Now let's actually look at the impact of that and how that relates to physiology. Well, when we have this, what we call core wound or core meaning, okay, I am unsafe, I'm unlovable, that is a belief. We can think of that as being the tree trunk. Following a belief, we will have all sorts of thoughts. So we may have thoughts that are like, oh, something bad could happen. I don't know what's going to go wrong. I don't know if anybody's going to love me. Am I really doing a good job? And all of those things are going to be related back to that core belief. Those core beliefs, I am unsafe and I am unlovable. So you hear all the thoughts that reflect back that belief. Now, following thoughts, how do we feel when we start thinking things like that? We start feeling scared, anxious, nervous, sad, devastated, desperate, all these emotions, which are made up of neurochemical reactions. Now, the neurochemistry that we have obviously has a direct impact on our physiology and our immune system even, and how our body functions. And interestingly enough, neuroscience, a neuroscientist named Antonio Damasio back in 2008, I believe, proved conclusively that every single action we take is based on our emotional state. So even people who think, oh, I'm a really rational, logical person, they're still just making emotionally based decisions and just quick to rationalize them through logic afterwards. So I use an acronym for that. I call it our BTEA, beliefs, thoughts, emotions, actions. Now, we can also have a belief that goes directly to an emotion when it gets activated, but you'll see that's sort of like the train of events or chain of events that takes place. Now, if you look at the actual actions, okay? So let's say we break down the BTEA, we're looking at the A. Let's say somebody has this, I am unsafe and I am unloved core wound. And let's say we look at, okay, well, how do we function when we are trying to overcome those horrible feelings? Okay. Because we feel the sadness, the fear, all those negative things associated with it. Well, a lot of times, because our subconscious mind is also a needs meeting machine, it will go to whatever early associations or programs we had around those things. And when you look at when a child first is eating, for example, and this can be one of countless different examples, but when a child is its first experience of food, a child's first experience of food is when they're being breastfed. And so what's happening? They're being held, they're being cradled, and there's a tremendous amount of oxytocin, the bonding neurochemical, being produced, which, you know, we have this early association that food equals comfort, safety, and love. So let's say we take this person with these beliefs. Oh my gosh, I'm unloved. I'm unsafe. Now I'm thinking all these thoughts. I'm feeling all these things. My actions are going to follow. The action BTEA, the action will follow no matter what. Neuroscience has proven this. So guess what a lot of people do? How can I get love and safety? I'm going to go eat a whole tub of ice cream. And so interestingly enough, that's one of many different events that can take place. For some people, it's alcohol. For some people, it's smoking. For some people, it's, whatever coping mechanism or action they're taking. But if we're not in charge of our own programming and we don't know how to rewire these painful beliefs, these thought patterns, the emotional output, then we're really not in charge of our actions. We'll often go about unhealthy ways of trying to get these painful, emotions that we're feeling away from us, which can be eating ice cream all the time. That affects our body and physiology, but also our emotions are made up of those neurochemical reactions, which also have this huge impact on our body and physiology as a whole. So I think something that's so important for us to recognize is that if we don't know what's happening at the mind level, there will be some sort of immediate or eventual impact on the body, not just neurochemically, but also through the different habits that we have. Now, the good news is that there's a way to source exactly what those things are for each person. And there's a way to recondition not only those belief and thought patterns, but that will change our emotional state and thus our neurochemistry. And that will have a huge impact on our actions or coping mechanisms, so we can work to really resolve things that are not serving us, because maybe there are these immediate short-term gratification things we do, like eat all the ice cream, drink all the wine when we feel unloved or unsafe. But we can actually recondition those coping mechanisms as well.
Wow. Okay. And so, but then for the people that skate through, how about those people? The people that have those I have this bad habit of asking like 20-part questions. And so as a guest, you did a brilliant job of answering part of it. And now I'm like, okay, but there was the other part. And it's my fault.
Oh, don't worry. No, it's amazing.
Now, what about those other people, the ones that somehow seem to be immune to this stuff, right? Or is it someone in their life, or is it self-resourced, or does it, probably it depends, depending on the person, but.
So there's this amazing body of work about post-traumatic growth. And it talks about how the people who actually come out of, because usually you'll see trauma creates traumatic programs. You'll usually see for some period of time, they are really suffering. Like you don't really get somebody, for example, who is a Holocaust survivor who like leaves the Holocaust and is just all good right away, right? Like it's actually what's happening is the things that they're doing over time are actually reconditioning those patterns. So what you'll generally see with survivors, with people who actually exhibit the benefits of what we call post-traumatic growth is a few different things. Number one, they're willing to change the story about themselves. And and what that is doing is it's changing those ideas that I am unsafe, I am unloved. There can be many other ones that we acquire. I'm trapped, I'm helpless, I'm powerless, I'll be abandoned, I'll be alone, I can't trust anybody. Like we have these core stories that we tell. So that person is usually making some sort of concerted effort to change the story about themselves. And honestly, that is such an important thing to do because it's an injustice that anybody goes through a traumatic event once. But the real injustice is that people who don't work through those stories end up reliving that same way of thinking, feeling, believing, acting on a daily basis for decades if they don't actually rewire these things. So you'll see post-traumatic growth shows that person works to change their sense of self and identity through not defining themselves by their past experiences. Number two, as hard as it is, those individuals are working to find a silver lining. They're working to see how they became more empathetic, more compassionate, more resilient, more resourceful, and how those things can actually benefit them across the course of life. For some people, they go through a really painful situation with their own family, like they're in foster care, for example, but then their silver lining could be that they become the best parent because they want to give to their children what they felt like they didn't get, right? And you'll see when somebody's willing to either find the silver lining perceptually, like, hey, how did this serve me? How did I grow from this experience? What did I learn? Sometimes it's what was I forced to let go of that was no longer serving me? When we do that, it helps us come full circle. Or if we haven't done it yet, if we're not on the other side of it yet to say I'm the best parent and haven't, had that experience yet, then instead what's happening is we have to be willing to take away those things that could become the silver lining. Hey, this was a really hard thing. Okay, what are the lessons I can take away? What are the things that I want to actually mold for the future for myself so I never have to experience something like this again? And when we are able to do that and shift out of that, these are some of the major features that you'll see create post-traumatic growth. Now, there's one last big thing, and it sort of goes back to that BTEA piece as well. When we're having painful belief patterns and thoughts and emotions and actions, often our nervous system is quite dysregulated. So often we spend more time with a history of trauma in sympathetic, which is our fight or flight, which I'm sure most of your listeners probably know, instead of parasympathetic, which is more our rest and digest mode. And so what we can do is we can take ourselves from a situation where we go, you know what? I am feeling constantly dysregulated. And if we can do active things that re-regulate our nervous system, it's also a part of leaving the trauma behind because our body's relearning that we are safe. And so that can be things like meditation, breath work, journaling, light exercise. But generally, you're going to see that somebody coming from those adverse events, if they are the ones not affected by trauma as much as adults, they've changed the story about themselves. They found the silver lining. They've taken away the key lessons, grown from and through that experience, and regulated their nervous system in some capacity. And these things can be at random. It can be that somebody took yoga class, somebody learned to meditate, and if we hit those major components, and there's some other ones, but those are the main ones, that's where you'll generally see things come full circle. And honestly, sometimes people are much stronger and better for it.
You would think so. I mean, coming through something like that, it's that whole "what doesn't kill you makes you stronger" narrative, right? Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how, and I think you mentioned it a couple of times, but let's maybe lean into a little bit some of the people or people you've worked with where you've seen this kind of express in the more physiological sense. Like, as you said, depending on the individual, it's going to show up differently. Someone might be an alcoholic. They could be a food addict. They could be, a very possessive person in their relationships or whatever the case may be. But there might be other cases where, and I don't know if you will have observed this, but I know that we talk about sometimes people with chronic illness, not that they don't have a chronic illness, but that somehow their psyche, their subconscious, their unconscious, whatever it is, maybe holds them there, or I don't know what the right language is about it, because it's not, I don't want to assign blame in any way, shape, or form, but more that the mind is playing a real role in in holding them in a certain space. And maybe it's an effort to feed an existing story. Like, I need attention, and this is the way I get attention, which sounds horrible. And somebody listening to this could be getting really mad at me. I don't mean that in a bad way. I just mean, like, is there a piece sometimes in some chronic illness that we have to resolve and figure out this piece of the puzzle in order for the body to be able to heal properly?
Absolutely. So here's what it generally is. Our conscious mind can observe and analyze things and realize what's healthy and unhealthy. Our subconscious mind wants to maintain its comfort zone, because more than anything, our subconscious mind is survival oriented, and it says what's familiar is safe because we've been surviving and we've been living. And so familiarity equals survival. So if somebody comes from a background where they were constantly in fight or flight, and they constantly felt unsafe or unloved or abandoned or trapped or shame, or, all these different experiences we can have in terms of our beliefs, our emotions, what's often happening is our subconscious mind is finding ways to keep recreating those same thoughts, feelings, and beliefs. And I can tell you from working, so I was in client practice for about 10 years. I would see 40 plus people a week. And I never had one client that I didn't feel like their life was on repeat internally when they came in to do the work. They didn't realize because the external events seemed to change. So for example, let's say that, and I'll tell you one story of a client, the first person that came to mind. So I had a client, she grew up in a household where there was a lot of betrayal, caught both of her parents cheating on each other multiple times, had these kind of fractured trust wounds. And as an adult, would always invest in romantic relationships with people who were not able to be committed and who were going to cheat. Now, her external characters in her story were changing. It was issues with mom and dad, and then it was issues with partners, and she would have the same issues with friends. It was kind of all over her life. But the internal situation was the exact same. She had this big I will be betrayed core wound. She would constantly think thoughts about what's happening, trying to read between the lines, high, very sympathetic, very sympathetic nervous system, high alert.
Like hypervigilance.
Exactly, extremely hypervigilant. And she would constantly go through those same thought patterns, feel the same fear and anxiety and worry, take the same types of actions. And so the external world seemed to change, but the internal programming is on repeat. And interestingly enough, when we first meet people, our conscious mind picks up about 40 to 60 bits per second of information. Our subconscious and unconscious, 1 billion bits per second of information. So we meet people, and based on their micro expressions, body language, tone of voice, posturing, like so many different things, even how long their sentences are, like so many things, we are building this intricate web of information about somebody very, very quickly. And our subconscious is essentially, in a way, scanning the environment, getting that web of information, and reinvesting in people and situations that make things feel familiar. So if we look back on how this actually relates to chronic illness, well, if somebody's stuck in these repeat patterns and their physiology is constantly upregulated, sympathetic nervous system, same types of events and situations, obviously that's going to wear on us over time in a really big way. And so I really think that I'm super into natural health as well. I love all this stuff. And of course, there's a million things that you can do from that perspective that you're the expert on. But I think that mind and body have to go together. I think that we want to do everything we can on the purely physical side with our diet, lifestyle, supplementing, sleeping, all those things. But if we don't correct those mind things, it's only going to be half of the equation, because we can take all the right supplements, we can try to sleep well, we can do all these things, but if we haven't resolved these painful programs over here that are going to keep us in chaos at a nervous system level with our beliefs and our emotions and the neurochemistry of that, then we are going to find ourselves in those same types of patterns on a very regular basis.
Wow. That's really interesting. So this is almost the kind of work that pretty much everybody should do at some point.
I believe that.
I mean, because I feel like none of us will have come out unscathed. I mean, you could have had a particularly happy childhood, and so maybe you get the odd person who's particularly well adjusted, but there's probably a story somewhere. Is this what people talk about when they talk about doing the shadow work? Like what's operating in the shadows? Is this, or is that something different?
That's very similar.
The shadows sound dark.
That's very similar. So this being in the same types of environments with the same types of patterns can definitely be a part of the shadow. The shadow has a lot to do with traits, like that the things that trigger you and other people will also be things you're doing to yourself. So for example, if you're like, Paul never listens to me, he just doesn't listen. It's like often shadow work, I'll be like, oh, and where do you not listen to you? And people will be like, oh no, I never listen to myself. So that's shadow work. And I mean, you'll see it with people being like, oh, this person's not emotionally available to me. They're not, open. They're not making an effort. Okay, where are you not emotionally available to yourself? Where are you not making the effort? And we actually heal that, which is our shadow in that context, through changing how we operate in relationship to self. And the reason it's actually so powerful is because by doing that, we change our own patterns in relationship to self, which actually moves our subconscious comfort zone. And now how we treat ourselves is what's most familiar. And that will actually shift and change who we're attracted to, what we're investing in, and how we're thinking, feeling, and believing. But there's a lot of really cool programming tools. Like you can really change a lot of different things. I'm happy to share one or two in a little bit. But there's that's definitely, I feel like shadow work's an amazing awareness tool. It helps us do the 360-degree insight towards ourselves, because it's a great question to ask yourself. The things that trigger you in other people, where are these mine towards self? But I think that more impactful than that, maybe equally impactful, but maybe a little bit more, is us being able to find those core stories. Like if we've spent years feeling like I'm unlovable, I'll be abandoned, I'm going to be trapped. Like if we find ourselves telling those same narratives in our relationship to money, in our relationship to food, in our relationship to our career, because everything is a relationship in our lives. And every relationship we have in our external world is really just based on the subconscious comfort zone of our relationship to self. And so if we can find these things that are there for a very long period of time and uproot them, we can change that BTEA acronym, that sort of chain of events that's happening. What we're going to find is that, that moves us into a space of health and wellness, because we're uprooting. I personally believe that the human body and mind are magnificent. And if you left them to their own devices as sort of more of a blank slate, you would see miraculous things. But what we have is all this trauma that gets lodged into our mind. It's it's not the tape recorder that it's the issue. It's the tapes going into the tape recorder, right? And so when we can change those things, you'll see we go back to that really powerful foundation of what we naturally are.
Yeah. Oh, that's fantastic. Okay. So let's talk about some tools, because I think a lot of us as adults, we've been living with all these little, this little tape, this little narrative. And what you said earlier, which is very true, is our subconscious, I think our subconscious is looking to be comfortable, and comfortable and safe is what we know. So your subconscious mind is not sitting there going, all right, let's pull this stuff out at the root and reprogram. Your subconscious mind is like, dude, this has been working for us. We're good. We're okay here. This is how we roll, and working for me. I don't know what you're talking about. So how do you help people to actually get past those defenses?
Yes, absolutely. So I'll give one tool to start, and it sort of has a part A and a part B. So I want to encourage people in part A to look for times that they tend to get triggered, like the things that trigger you the most in your relationships, in your career. And notice if there's any pattern first, just at a high level. Is it when people are dismissive? Is it when people are short or rude? Is it when people are, shut down or untrustworthy, or when they pull away? What are those patterns or those themes? Okay. And then I want you to pick one specific time that's recent. So if you can lock in one specific time, literally moment in time. So maybe somebody says, it was yesterday morning with my boss, and my boss gave me critical feedback. And when I have critical feedback, that really makes me feel triggered. Okay. So in that moment, you want to ask yourself, in the moment that I have this triggering event, that snapshot of time that I have in my mind, what did I make that mean about myself? Okay. And I'm going to list out some core wounds that are very common. Okay. There will be quite a few of them, but people will hopefully be able to see, oh my gosh. And people will probably just notice it from hearing the core wounds, that that's the big wound. And we tend to each have 5 or 6 big ones, unless we had a very, very great childhood. And so we'll generally see it's things like, I will be abandoned, alone, disliked, excluded, rejected, not good enough, unlovable, unsafe, betrayed, trapped, helpless, powerless, seen as defective or shameful, kind of like something's wrong with me, don't belong, and disliked, and unworthy and bad. Those are the main core wounds that we'll see. And so we'll see, like, from those major core wounds, if somebody can go, oh yeah, like, oh my gosh, whenever I feel like people think I'm bad, I always over-explain myself too much, or, oh, you'll sort of see like those dynamics that show up for you. So let's just use that example of, somebody's boss was critical to them yesterday. We'll pretend it's me, and then I have a boss and they were critical to me yesterday. And so let's say I make that mean I'm not good enough. And so then what we want to be able to do is realize, okay, this is probably a core wound. And I want to encourage people in part A here to check in and be like, is this something that's pretty triggering for me in many areas of life whenever I feel not good enough? And what you'll see is core wounds are very permeating. They'll be pervasive across all areas because, again, they're in the relationship to self. And so you'll probably see, oh my gosh, if I feel not good enough in a relationship, that's really painful, or not good enough in friendships or workplace or with my money, or, all these different aspects of life. So once you're pretty clicked in, okay, that's a big core wound. Well, now I want to ask people to just reflect on, how has this actually cost you in your life? Like, you having this story, this being a part of your identity, you constantly believing this about yourself and probably projecting it everywhere. How is that costing you? Like, what is that costing you? Are you seeing that that's costing you good relationships, or, career growth, or financial abundance? Like, where is that really showing up? And that's sort of part A. That's just our like awareness piece. Okay. Now, some people from part A might go, oh my gosh, I have like 5 of those wounds that she listed off. Like, there were so many.
One.
But we're just going to, for the sake of this exercise, you can do a couple at a time later, but for the sake of our part B here, we're just going to pick one core wound. So we'll stick on the topic of not good enough because it's a very obvious example. So now we have to realize, okay, this is a subconscious program. Nobody's choosing this. Nobody's waking up on Sunday morning saying, today I'm going to tell myself 400 times that I'm not good enough. Like, these are subconscious things. They're happening at an autopiloted, programmed space. So we have to rewire them at the level that they exist. We have to rewire the subconscious mind. Now, your conscious mind speaks language. Your subconscious mind speaks emotion and imagery. If I say to you, whatever you do, do not think of the pink elephant. You probably saw an image of a pink elephant, and probably everybody listening. So what happens is your conscious mind hears do not, because it speaks language, but your subconscious is emotions and images. It just sees the pink elephant. And if somebody told a sad story, it would feel the sad emotions associated with that and see the images of what's happening in the story. So we have to speak to our subconscious mind. So step 1 of this sort of part B tool is the actual reprogramming after we found the wound. Step 1 is, what is the opposite of your wound? So very easy. If I'm not good enough, I am good enough. If I'm going to be abandoned, I'll stay connected. And you can just look on antonyms on the internet if somebody's not sure. So step 1, what's the opposite of your core wound? Step 2, we have to speak to our subconscious mind, which means we're going to speak in emotions and images. Now, how do we find emotions and images? Well, every single memory we ever have is just a series of emotions and images. If I said, tell me your favorite childhood memory, and you said, oh, I was playing on the playground with my friends, you would see the images of the slide. And we've all seen when people tell old stories, they may laugh or smile, or they recount all the emotions in there. So what we have to do is find 10 memories of times we felt good enough. Okay, so opposite of the core wound, 10 memories, because now we're getting emotion and imagery. And we use 10 because we need repetition. Repetition fires and wires. So it's actually creating these new neural pathways. So 10 memories of times we felt good enough is step 2. And they can be small. They can be like, I was a good friend yesterday. They can be, I showed up to work and moved through this challenge with my team well the day before. They can be small things. We just need a little bit of that emotion and imagery and repetition. Step 3, we record it into our phone, onto our computer, and we listen back for 21 days, because research into neuroplasticity shows it takes about 21 days to fire and wire new neural pathways that are strong enough that they will stick, that they will stay, they will become a new part of our identity. And those old neural pathways, they actually atrophy over time, kind of like muscles. And so when we divest from those, invest in this new narrative, and we repeat for 21 days, speaking to our subconscious mind to oppose that original painful idea that's probably popping up everywhere in your life, that may be the glass ceiling in so many different facets of your being, that's where we not only change, this idea we have about ourselves, but it's changing the B in BTEA. It's changing that belief we have about ourselves, which means accompanying that, our thoughts will change, our emotions will change, the neurochemistry we're having that's being impacted by these things can also be subject to change. And that has the capacity to change our actions and how we behave towards ourselves, because we're targeting root cause by targeting rewiring that belief. It's like plucking a weed out at its root. So that's like one tool. There's really many, but that's one really good starter tool. If somebody's like, okay, well, what are those programs that are really hard for me and limiting me? And how can I finally rewire them if I just am sick and tired of feeling this way?
Yeah. So so does it have to be, I mean, is it kind of like affirmations a little bit? Like would it, because there's another practice, which I don't know if it has any bearing on what you do, but where people are told, stand in front of the mirror every morning and tell yourself like those things that you believe you need to hear. Is it different to have it recorded and played back to you, which is kind of in a way more passive versus...
Yeah, the biggest thing is when you have an affirmation, I actually really don't like affirmations because it's your conscious mind speaking to your conscious mind. Because it's just, I'm good enough, da da da. Yeah.
The subconscious is like, yeah, you chatter away there. We're good over here.
And so this, because we get the emotion, the imagery, and the specific repetition on that daily basis, that's enough repetition we need to truly fire and wire and deepen those neural pathways. And we're speaking to our subconscious mind by leveraging the emotions and imagery.
That's so interesting. I mean, it's all very fascinating. Like I find it in some ways a little bit, I don't know, like I tend to be matter of fact. I'm like, just don't do that or don't think that or whatever the case may be. And yet I think that anyone, if they really think about it, know that we have drivers operating under the surface that take over. And I mean, I'm a big old procrastinator. Like I told you a story right before we recorded the podcast. Like I've gotten to the point now where I have this pathological need to have a lot of inventory of podcasts in the bank so I don't get caught with my pants down like I did once. So I don't know if that means I rewired my story or if I've just developed a coping mechanism to overcome it.
I love that though. That's fantastic. Well, really interestingly enough, I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole or like overwhelm anyone who's new to these topics, but there's actually two like real branches that govern the subconscious mind all the time. We really talked about branch one, which is our subconscious beliefs and all those things we adopt about our sense of self and identity and all those wounds we said, trapped, helpless, powerless, abandoned, alone. The other thing is actually our needs. At all times, we each have a unique set of needs that's governing us 24/7. And actually every single decision we make is a subconscious strategy to get those needs met according to what we believe about ourselves. So for example, let's say somebody has a really big need for security, which is a common need. Then you may find yourself over preparing for things or making sure that everything is really well, organized and having this batch of everything. But you can also look at how that's interacting with our belief system, because these two facets are like kind of equally important, but interacting with each other all the time. Somebody could have a huge need for security, but if they truly believe that skydiving is safe, then they might jump out of an airplane. So you have these two sort of facets happening all the time. And often what people will see in their behaviors too is like if somebody's listening and they're like, why do I have this unhealthy habit? You want to look at your beliefs that sponsor it, like the BTEA, because the action is what our habit is. But sometimes you can look a little deeper too and realize that every action that you take is also a subconscious strategy to get needs met. And I'll tell one really quick example of this to make it clear. So something I had to work on when I was young is I saw tons of fighting growing up. So I really thought like, A, relationships are fighting, and B, I also thought like, okay, well, if you're in a situation and there's not a fight, then what if the relationship's falling apart? It must be boring. And that was my very dysfunctional programming as a young adult. So when I was about, 20 years old, I was really working on these things. And I was like, okay, well, I yell in relationships and I raise my voice, and it wasn't something I was proud of. And I knew that I'd see my conscious mind feel really guilty about it, apologize later, feel really badly, and yet tell myself I have to stop yelling, but I would keep repeating the pattern. So I asked myself, learning about the subconscious mind and our needs and our beliefs, I said, well, what need does yelling meet? And what I realized is yelling meets the need to be seen and heard, because when we yell, we get loud and we get big and it's the need to finally communicate, because sometimes I would only say things I was holding in otherwise. And it was like the excuse to finally say what you need to say when you're angry. And to set a boundary. Anger and yelling sets a boundary. It keeps people back. And I realized if I had to score myself from 1 to 10 around how seen and heard and how good I am with my boundaries and how much I feel like I can really like protect myself in this particular way, I was scoring almost 0 at everything. I wasn't really truly communicating. I wasn't allowing myself to be vulnerable and get seen and heard in close relationships. And I was boundaryless. And so you'll see that when we yell, it's meeting all of those needs in one fell swoop. And you'll see this with food. Like we talked about, food is meeting the needs for connection, safety, and comfort all at once in one fell swoop. And so when we look more deeply into our different habits as well, especially the habits that we're like, why do I do this? Like, why do I keep doing these things? And yet we're repeating, we'll actually be able to unpack, oh yeah, like this bad habit, quote unquote, is my conscious mind judging it as bad, but my subconscious mind seeing it as more good than bad, or else it wouldn't be doing those things. And strategically, it's getting certain needs met at that level of mind.
Wow. Okay. I love that. So how long does it take? I mean, you said 21 days. You said 21 days of having to reprogram an underlying belief, but right? Does it always take 21 days? Do some people, like I would imagine some people are, and I know like there's a person in my life who I understand their behavior because I understand their childhood. Mm-hmm. Like I could write a thesis on it and it's not even my area, but I can't imagine this person being able to do this kind of work without risking falling apart, because they would literally have to deconstruct their the castle that they've built around themselves to keep themselves safe. You know what I mean? Like like you come across people like that where it's such a powerful coping mechenism that it's just not that simple. It's not a 21-day program.
Yeah. So that was probably me. So it takes 21 days to reprogram core wounds. So when we're trying to become secure, so we're trying to become like, the most secure version of ourselves, the most stable version of ourselves, really set a lot of this stuff to rest. I actually put people into 90-day programs. So, the first thing is we'll do 2 to 3 core wounds at a time. If we have a lot of work to do. So we'll do like, let's say somebody has the I am bad, I will be betrayed, I am unsafe, plug those in, do your auto suggestion in the morning, like listen back and feel about it for, 3 to 6 minutes every morning for that 21 days. We'll start putting a dent in that. Honestly, people will start seeing their thoughts, emotions, and behaviors change as they start dropping core wounds. The cool part about this work is that you don't have to go back and relive all your childhood experiences. You just need to know, like, those are my wounds right now. Those are the things that come up and aggravate me so much on a daily basis. So I get people to do the auto suggestion as the first part of the program and plug into that first, and then continue it on across the 90 days as they hit, 3 core wounds out of the way, move on to the next 3 for my next 21-day segment. People see a lot of growth in that as long as they're really listening back each morning for the 21 days. If you miss like a morning or 2, it still has a huge impact, but I try not to tell people that because you want them.
Well, no, because it's a habit, right? Like there was something someone was asking me about, do I have to do it every day? And I'm like, you don't actually, but if we tell you not to do it every day, it becomes less automatic. And then the odds of you waking up one morning realizing you haven't done it in a week are much higher.
Exactly. So we always try to say like, yeah, do it every day. And then, because some people will be like, oh yeah, I only missed a day or 2, but they missed 4 days. And then they're, so it gets a little messy that way. So the second thing is I get people to go to their needs, all their unhealthy habits, food, alcohol, drinking, smoking. And I'm not saying, by the way, if somebody's like an alcoholic, just do this, like go to rehab, get a structured program, go to detox, like all that kind of stuff, of course. But if we have these habits and we know like, okay, there's something here that I'm trying to get out of this, generally it's because we have these outdated ways of getting our needs met. So like if somebody's, in a position where they're binge eating food, often they're usually just starving for a connection and safety and comfort. And so we get them to unpack those and go, okay, well, what are updated ways of getting these needs met? How can I get comfort and safety, for example, by regulating my nervous system? So I'm not constantly feeling upregulated because that's highly uncomfortable for us, even if we're used to it. How can I make sure that I'm getting connection by maybe opening up more, being more vulnerable with people, sharing more with people, self-connecting through journaling, meditation, etc. So we get people to come up with healthy ways of getting their needs met in newer forms. The third big focus area that I get people to sit in is nervous system regulation, having a daily evening habit. So we'll usually do like morning auto suggestion during your day, come up with a new way of meeting these needs that you were meeting through anger or through food or whatever it might be. And in the evening, some sort of habit like a meditation where we teach our body it's safe to stop doing. It's actually safe to start being. And you don't have to constantly be in the survival mode of doing. You can feel safe just being. And we repattern that by teaching our body that repetitively over time. And some other things I'll help people work on are like boundaries and communication, because those go a pretty long way in improving the quality of our lives and workplace relationships, family, all the relationships in our life. But generally, when we start focusing on the core beliefs, the needs, and the nervous system regulation, people's lives will change very dramatically in a short period of time, because we're dealing with root cause. We don't have to go and relive every childhood trauma or anything like that. We just say, this is what's constantly showing up for me now. I can recondition it, and I can upgrade the way that I'm living my life and how my body's feeling. And that's where we'll see a profound amount of healing from that psychological and even bleeding into the physiological level.
Yeah, it feels a little bit like, and hopefully this doesn't sound bad, but it sounds a bit like minimum effective dose. Like, instead of feeling that you have to kind of, strap on your guns and go plowing through the trauma and all the horrible experiences or traumatic and difficult experiences, which, to your point, forces you to relive them and relive that trauma. And sometimes maybe I would think almost re-inoculates, 100%. Like it can almost backfire, right? Like it takes you right back there. Where what you're saying is, let's go to the door, let's open the window or open the door, look inside, observe, accept, understand, and then close the door and decide to move past.
Yeah, and really deal with root cause, because that's the thing, to be perfectly honest. And like, this is a slightly controversial topic maybe, but just like, I have a bit of a bone to pick as somebody who was originally trained in a lot of the traditional methods of like talk therapy and things like that. By just rehashing old experiences and saying, oh, just accept it, let's just talk about it over and over again, you're actually refiring and wiring those same core fears, emotions.
Exactly. You're going back on that pathway all over again.
Exactly. And so, I find it to be much more impactful to say, hey, what have I learned to believe about myself because of my experiences? What meaning do I have in my life? And we don't even have to be like, I don't know what it is or when it happened. You don't even have to rehash any of it. You can say, what triggers me every day now? What triggers me in my relationships the most? What triggers me around my relationship to money or career the most? Find those core wounds, plug them into the auto-suggestion, belief reprogramming work, and move the needle on it. And you can, because when we're storing trauma, the worst part of what we're storing is the meaning we gave to the traumatic event. That's what we have to rewire. Right. And as somebody who's been through both medium T, small t, and large T trauma and did a ton of core wound reprogramming, I'll tell a personal story. So I had this experience, and I won't get into all of what it is, but just I had this big T trauma when I was a kid. And I had a really hard time sharing it growing up. And I would get into romantic relationships, and I would think eventually there comes a time where I have to share this. And so maybe it was like 6 months into dating somebody or 4 months into dating somebody. And as a young adult at the time, before I did a lot of belief reprogramming, I would tell that story, and my hands would shake a little, and I'd feel my heart racing, and I would feel like I had this lump in my throat and I couldn't like catch my breath, and I would tell it and share, and it would feel really hard and really scary to share. And then I got my hands on all this subconscious work, did a ton of belief reprogramming, didn't particularly revisit that experience, thought I would eventually. Thought that, oh yeah, my list of things I'm going to work through. And that was on there. And one day I was in a relationship, and I told this story, and it was like, I was disconnected from it. It was like, not in a bad way. It was as if I recounted the experience, no racing heart, no, faster breathing, no ball in my throat, no quivering hands, just telling this story and feeling like it was like almost someone else's story, like a distant dream. And I had this peace around it. And what I realized is because I had done so much belief reprogramming around what I made it mean, I made it mean I was unsafe, I was shameful, I was bad, I was trapped, I was all these things. Did all the work around those core wounds already, retold that story, and it wasn't affecting me any longer. It wasn't like in my body, in my nervous system, in my patterning. It just felt like, oh, this is something that happened and it's come full circle. It doesn't affect me anymore. And you know, I've seen this replicated with, I think I had over 18,000 client sessions, 1-to-1 or 2-to-1 if I was seeing couples, and have had like 30,000 or so people come through our programs. And like, these are measurable, replicated results for people. And so we don't have to go and just retell this old story, relive the old trauma. We can take the painful meaning that we've given to ourselves because of it, rewire that, and you'll feel that emotional disconnection take place, because that's really what the traumatic part was more than anything else.
I love it. I mean, it makes so much sense, and it makes so much more sense, honestly, than having to relive it over and over again. And, you know, like I said to you before we started recording, you know, if we're in a space where people are going to live longer lives and are going to be healthier for longer and be, you know, like the new 80 is going to be the new 60 or the new 50, whatever the case may be. I feel like, you know, earlier generations, it never occurred to them that this work could be done or should be done or was a thing. Like, things just were the way that they were. But in a way, like, the world is up the ante on us. It's a more stressful place. There's more,
Yeah.
you know, there's more triggering stuff. Like, I mean, you know, all you got to do is turn on TV or Instagram or Twitter or TikTok or whatever, and you're like, oh my God, what is going on? But it's like, if we're going to be able to move through this and remain healthy and happy and a dose of happiness, then being able to do this work and release some of this stuff for whatever that next phase may bring, it feels to me like it's kind of like, I don't know, renovating your house.
Oh my God, I love that. That's such a good analogy.
Well, it's kind of like, oh, you know, the bathroom's kind of gross and the kitchen's kind of grungy. Got me this far, but man, if I'm going to be in here for another 20 years, we need to freshen things up a little bit.
I love that, because the foundation is there. Your subconscious mind itself doesn't change, just the programming within it, kind of like your bathrooms or your. I like that. Yeah. That's a great one. I might steal that.
By all means.
Thank you.
Right away. Look at me and smile when you use it. Well, Thais, this has been like a really fascinating conversation. I love the work that you do. I feel like I'm going to have to sign up for your program or something. Get some of that stuff, get some of that gunk out of the way. Why don't you tell? Is there anything else that you think we missed that you want to share with the audience?
I think that's really it. I mean, that really covers the main pieces about how our mind and body are connected and how it's happening and why it matters. And it's funny because I just anecdotally, like, I was so into the mind, so into all that stuff, and then did a lot of like health work over the years physically, and just saw how much that mattered and played a role in the mind. And I think they really have this reciprocal relationship where both feed into each other. So yeah, just grateful to have this conversation and really, really enjoyed this.
Yeah, no, I think, it's two sides of a coin. I don't think you can have one without the other. So, all right. Well, your next task, Thais, is tell people where they can find you and find out more about your programs and all that jazz.
Thank you. Yeah. So I am at personaldevelopmentschool.com. Those are like all of our 90-day programs. And then I put daily content out on YouTube, which is Personal Development School Thais Gibson. It's kind of our main channel. And then we also have a podcast, which you'll hopefully be on there as a guest. And that is on Apple and Spotify or any sort of major podcast platform. And I'm at personaldevelopment_school on Instagram.
I love it. Thank you so much. And actually, you guys, if you're listening and if you're feeling inspired to go sign up for a program, your team was really generous and gave the audience a code. It's Natalie 25 off. Now, the secret code is you have to know that Natalie has an H in it. So NATHALIE, number 25 off, and that'll save you 25% off the cost of any program or some of the
every
programs
program,
anyway.
anything. Yep.
Okay, I'm off everything. All right. Well, thank you so much, Thais, and good luck with your move back to Central Canada. We're both Canadian, actually, you guys. So this was a special treat for me anyway. I don't often get to talk to Canadians. And so Thais is coming back from the East Coast back to Ontario. So welcome back soon.
Thank you. Looking forward to it. Thank you for having me.